So welcome back to another Explain Yourself episode. I really like doing these. So this time I'm here with Christy Wails, who's a PhD student with me in the biology department at Northern Illinois University. So thank you for coming on and talking to us.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. So the way we like to start off is, can you give us sort of your non-jargony elevator pitch about your current research?
Yeah, sure. So I am looking at how seabirds choose where to nest after islands where they nest at have been restored. And so seabirds are a really unique group of birds that spend their entire lives out at sea, and they only ever return to land when it's time to raise their young. And so they depend on these really isolated islands to do so. But what happens is, because humans are adventurous, we also like to explore and find cool new islands. We sometimes bring unintended pests along, things like rats and mice that are really problematic for the species that live on islands. So these mammals, rats and mice, will attack and eat young seabirds and their offspring. So there's been a lot of work to clear and restore islands so that they don't have these mammals anymore. And so I'm specifically looking at how seabirds respond to those conservation efforts.
Awesome. Okay. So that was a nice little package. So when you say isolated islands, what are we talking about here?
So there's certainly a wide range of where these birds choose to nest. Some of them can be pretty remote in terms of if you think about Alaska and the islands that kind of come off on that little chain. Those are the Aleutian Islands. They're out there. Those are pretty remote. Basically, when you're out there, you only ever see fishing vessels.
Okay.
Other islands can be a bit more accessible, and you can see the mainland of whatever country or neighboring bit of land is there. It's really quite variable, and it depends on the species. So some are just smack dab in the middle of the ocean. Aleutian Islands are a good example of that. Others can be right off the coast of California, like the Farallones as well. Those are also really interesting seabird islands.
Okay. And so there's not is there a size restriction or whether or not humans have traditionally lived on there that helps us know whether or not these were good habitat for seabirds?
So it's really variable by species. Some like to nest on the surface of the island. They'll build little kind of columns that they'll nest on.
Okay.
Others will burrow underground and will nest underground. So depending on how they nest, vegetation structure or the plants that are on the island can really help to facilitate how they nest. When it comes to humans, though, there really is a mixed bag of what's been explored by humans and has evidence of human impacts. Things that are, of course, close by that people can see, you're probably going to go to that. And then mammals as well, rats can swim. And many people might not realize that rats are capable of doing that. And they can swim a very narrow channel, and so they could access close islands. Whereas the really remote ones, it depends on the history of exploration.
Interesting. So my favorite thing that you said there, and I already knew a little bit about this, but I'm still curious about the details. There are birds that burrow into the ground and lay their eggs underground. What is up with that? Yeah, so these birds have chosen these islands because they lack mammalian predators. But the one thing that they do have are other bird predators, things like eagles and owls. Okay.
And so having a nest underground gives them a space that they can raise their young without having to deal with bird predators.
Okay.
They're quite interesting when you're working with burrow nesting seabirds. The burrows can be quite long, you're talking arm's length or more.
Wow.
And they can be very intricate. They can have multiple different, some have several entrances, so that's fun trying to figure out where to access the chick that's inside.
Okay.
Others have several tunnels, and the chick can sometimes move in between the different chambers. It really, really varies depending on how that parent dug up that nest.
Interesting. And what are they using to dig?
Their feet. They are amazing excavators.
What?
It still blows my mind how they do it, right? Because, we think, if we try to dig with our hands, we're kind of lousy at it, right?
Yeah.
But they can do it with their feet. They have really sharp back toenails. Their feet are webbed, so I guess it helps them with scooping it away.
Oh.
But they are impressive.
Interesting. I guess I think about like animals that burrow using their front limbs, but like a bird's front limbs are its wings, so they're like folded on its back. So that blows my mind. Yeah.
Yeah, I've never actually saw one initiate burrow excavation, but I have seen it like that the bird is partway in a burrow and excavating, and it's just kicking all this dirt out of the burrow. And it's like the goofiest looking thing. It really is.
That's awesome. So you said you have to get to the chick. So part of your research is actually like doing some sort of visual and maybe manual inspection of the chicks. So how do you get them out, and what exactly are you looking for?
So I am really interested in looking at how parental choices, so how the parents are choosing where to nest and what they're feeding their chicks, can influence how chicks grow and whether or not they're able to survive.
Okay.
So for me to do that, I visit the seabird burrows about once every 4 to 5 days, depending on the weather, because we don't want to pull birds out when it's wet.
Yeah.
And the process is known as grubbing. You lay on the ground and shove your arm into the hole and hope for the best. Usually the bird is sitting in there taking a nap, and when there's a hand that reaches in, they get a little startled, and they have very sharp hooked bills because they feed on fish.
Yeah.
It's important that they can pick up fish from the ocean. That bill is remarkably good at also catching fingers. So there's usually a bit of biting, and then we gently hold the bill so that we can secure them. And you just pull them slowly so that they walk towards you, towards that opening. You have to be really, really careful when that's done. We want to make sure that they're not twisting or doing anything weird. If we find that they're really resistant, we'll let them go. They can just hang out in the burrow. We'll check on them some other date.
Interesting. So yeah, handling animals is definitely something that takes a lot of practice and training and
absolutely.
care.
Yeah, everything is done under, departments, of course, and we're all supervised and trained for this.
Yeah.
Otherwise, pulling a seabird out of a burrow is very challenging. They have a lot of opinions about that.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah,
they really do.
So do you have like one or two like focal species that you're working with, or are you just sort of going around sticking your arm in burrows and seeing what you find?
So we have a pretty good idea of where the birds are and who the birds are in terms of species. But my study focuses on 7 more common species from New Zealand. I am really interested in how these more common species are responding to rodent removal, and then taking that information and trying to apply it to the more rare species, the ones that we don't know a whole lot about.
So you think that there are similarities or maybe some differences, but you can sort of extrapolate from.
Yes, exactly. Yep. And the benefit of doing that is the species that I'm working with are relatively resilient to human activities. If we check on them every 4 or 5 days, they're not thrilled with it, but they're okay.
Okay.
Whereas our more sensitive species, the rarer species, might not be as keen or as willing to deal with human activities. So if we can take knowledge from more common species and try to apply it to others without having that human invasiveness going on, that's a great way to mitigate human impacts.
Awesome. Yeah. And speaking of mitigating human impacts, this whole research is sort of founded on the idea that we need to now eradicate or remove these small mammals, rats and mice, that accidentally got introduced along with humans when they encountered those islands. So how exactly does that work? How do you get rid of all of the tiny little fluffy things on a big piece of land?
It's tough because there are certainly human dimensions and human opinions and values about this. It's certainly not the rats or mice's fault for being there, So it's unfortunate to have to remove them. But it comes at the value of saving other species literally from the brink of extinction. So that's kind of like the trade-off, and that's the challenging trade-off that we have to deal with. But generally, once we have the public on their side and we have that support, what this involves is dropping bait. And we drop bait that is mammal specific, since there are no other native mammal species. Everything on the island would be invasive.
And when you say mammal specific, what does that mean?
So a lot of the baits that are used to euthanize mammals, or, euthanize mammals, they generally are, I don't know how to word this. Let me think about this for a second. Because I'm also trying to avoid the word poison.
I mean, yeah.
So, the baits that are used are mammal specific in that they only will have a negative effect on mammals that consume them.
Okay, so it's like biologically different.
Right.
Okay.
So it won't affect plants. It won't affect any of the fish or marine life around the island. Like, there's no chance of runoff having, a negative effect around the island.
Nice.
And if the birds eat it, they're not affected by it unless they're out there eating tons of it.
Okay.
So to avoid that, the bait is typically applied when birds aren't nesting. So we don't have the birds there, it's just the mammals. They're really hungry, they're looking for food. The bait appears, and so they eat it.
Okay.
And then they usually go back to their burrows, and that's where they pass.
Okay, so then the idea is that, like, once that has happened, there shouldn't be any living mammals left on the island, or do you still have to sort of do, like, checks to make sure?
Yeah, so they, like, when these bait applications are performed, there are personnel that will go back and double check to make sure that, we didn't miss any rats, we didn't miss any mice that need to be removed, because otherwise, a single female rat can produce so many young.
Yeah.
So you miss one and you didn't solve the problem. You just spent a lot of money.
Interesting. And so, you said the birds spend most of their time out to sea, so they're only really on the island during that nesting time. Okay, and that's when the rats and mice are a problem because they're eating just the eggs, or the eggs and the chicks?
It's a lot of times it's the eggs and chicks because they are the most vulnerable.
Okay.
The chicks especially, they're very fluffy, clumsy, they can't move very well, and they're in there, they cannot fly away at any point.
Oh,
so they're
okay.
there for months usually, just getting fat, growing, developing those wings that they need to leave. There are instances, especially early on when the adults are there taking care of the egg, where the rats and mice will take adult birds.
Wow.
And like especially like some of these very large birds, it's remarkable when you see that happen. The smaller ones, it's slightly less surprising because, the rats can sometimes be the size of the bird.
Sure.
But when it's like the bird is larger, it's very surprising.
Yeah, the pictures that Vitigo showed us of the albatross, that really surprised me.
Yeah, for sure.
Wow. And I know you've mentioned before, some of your research also involves taking samples from museum specimens. So can you talk a little bit more about that part of your research?
Sure. So with that, I am looking at genetics. I'm using museum specimens that have been collected from very specific locations to understand where birds are moving to and from.
Okay.
So I'm also collecting samples from my live birds. It just involves taking a few feathers. Doesn't hurt any more than us plucking a few hairs.
Yeah.
And it's only ever done once to them. So it's like a one-time, one and done.
Okay.
But then I'm able to use that and the genetic information to figure out who's moving where and how frequently. And I'm trying to relate that back to histories of mammal introductions and eradications on islands.
Oh, interesting. Huh. And I guess I wanted to ask a little bit about that because people have varied opinions on the value of museum collections and of ending the life of creatures in order to put them in museum collections. So, like, why is it so important to have those specimens? Why can't you just do this with the, the live birds that you're looking at right now?
So for the live birds, it gives me a snapshot of what's happening here and now, but it doesn't give me a perspective of how rats are specifically impacting the birds. So having this historical record through museum collections, I'm able to essentially go back in time. I'm time traveling to see what was genetic diversity like for these species before, where were these birds situated, and how has like genetic diversity changed over time with the presence of rats.
Huh, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
You talked a little bit about your field work, and you're working out on these islands that we've already talked about how isolated they are, so I'm assuming that means you spend quite a bit of time living at your field site, yeah?
Yes, I'm usually there 2 to 3 months straight. Depending on where I am, I don't really count on having cell phone reception. We have an emergency pager and backup communication so that we can at least check in with people and say, hey, I'm safe, or hey, we need to be picked up because it's not safe, So we have those safety checks. But then the other thing too is with us being in really remote locations, we have to bring every possible thing that we could need for 3 months along with us. We're not really set up in a house. It's a very, very rustic cabin. No traditional running water, so we have a rain collection system that we're able to use that way, but we need to filter it. No traditional electricity. We have solar panels, and for backup, we have an electric generator that runs off of gasoline. Yeah. But it's a very rustic life.
Cool. When you say, hey, we're safe, or hey, we're not safe, what are the sort of main safety concerns about living on these islands?
So safety concerns, yeah. Some of the big things are just like injuries that can happen. We are on very remote and very rugged islands. Mm-hmm. Falls can be very dangerous in terms of breaking bones, fractures, sprains. Fortunately, I've never been in that situation where we've had to deal with that, but we all have our first aid training, CPR certifications. Mm-hmm. That way, if something happens, we can at least respond and help one another. If someone is seriously injured, at that point, it's going through the proper communication channels and saying, hey, we have a person who's injured, we need to get them off the island, and it's a helicopter evacuation.
Wow. Yep. That's, wow.
We gotta keep people safe,
Absolutely, yeah.
We are hours away, sometimes even days depending on the weather, from hospitals and real medical care. So it's important that we have our own training that we can rely on. We have first aid equipment there that we can use if needed, and an evacuation method.
I think that really puts into perspective just how hard lots of scientists work in order to do science. I mean, we're sitting in a lab right now, and a lot of people, our concept of a scientist, you sit at the bench and you do your science, but you spend a lot of time on the ocean or on a tiny little island scrabbling around in the dirt for birds, and It's very dangerous, and that's not something that a lot of people would think of right away.
And I mean, the other thing too that can happen, that's not outside of the realm of possibility, a lot of the islands are near active volcanoes, and one of the islands that I had actually worked on for my master's was an active volcano. So having emergency volcano plans in place so that if there is seismic activity that is above normal, we can get out that island safely, and we don't have to worry about the volcano losing its top.
That's exciting.
Yeah, it really is.
Wow. So you've been a graduate student for a little while, and have you published any papers yet, or?
Yeah, a few. Not from my PhD just yet, but I had the opportunity to publish a few from my undergrad, which was pretty exciting.
Nice.
And I have a few from my master's, with a few more that are in review and hopefully some results soon.
Nice. So what is your favorite part of the whole like turning your research into a paper process?
You know, it's nice to be able to see the whole process from start to finish. You know, you start out with planning and preparation for the field work, carrying out the field work, collecting all the data in that moment, and then actually going back and like interpreting, analyzing that data, and really understanding what it is that has come out of your hard work, all of that 3 months of not talking to any of your loved ones back home, like seeing those rewards finally come back. That's such an amazing feeling. And then at the end, when you can just kind of sign off on it and submit, it's a really exciting finish.
What is your least favorite, or we could call it the most frustrating part? So the other side of that coin.
The most frustrating part. I think the most frustrating part is when there are disagreements between either the people that you're working with in terms of what kinds of questions and how we need to be analyzing data to make sure that we're, you know, getting what we need to out of it, as well as like differing opinions when we get responses back from reviewers. You know, everyone has different opinions, and trying to address and incorporate potentially conflicting responses from reviewers, that's always a challenge. You know, it's balancing those responses.
Yeah, the peer review process means that a lot of opinions get to be incorporated into what we make.
Yes, yeah, and like that's definitely a good part of science. It's just challenging when we have reviewer 1 saying one thing and reviewer 2 says the opposite.
Reviewer 2.
I think I've been reviewer 2 a few times.
That's fair. Everybody gets their turn. So you mentioned your undergrad, so let's sort of take it back a little now. Sure. Can we talk about your journey to deciding that you wanted to become a scientist at all, and also your decision to want to go to grad school?
Sure. I always was very interested in nature and wildlife as a kid. But the thing was, I hated birds. For real, I thought birds were like the worst, jerkiest animals ever. And I think it all stems from like being a little kid. Like I'm not even sure what it was. I found a baby bird outside of the nest, and it was a nest that I had watched because it was like right next to my window. And I was like, oh, I'm gonna put the bird back. You know, it fell out, I'm gonna put it back. Parents attacked me. Oh. And I was like, you're on your own, baby bird. You clearly do not want any help. You're on your own. And like, it was that, and then my mom had birds that would be very, very loud when I was like a teenager and trying to sleep in. So of course they were very annoying to me. And yeah, that's basically like the influence of why I thought birds were jerks.
Okay.
Those 2 stories.
That's a good start.
But yeah, like I was more so interested in like those charismatic mammals, you know, like lions and tigers and elephants and that kind of stuff. So like when I thought I wanted to be like a scientist and doing conservation work, I was like, yeah, those are the species I want to work with. Those are the cool ones. And so as an undergrad, I went to Penn State, and there was an internship opportunity that I had heard about working with water birds, so kind of like seabirds, except freshwater, up in Canada along the Canadian Great Lakes.
Oh.
And I was like, oh, that's cool. I mean, it's birds, so like that part's not cool, but you know, it's wildlife and Canada. Oh, sure, I'll apply. And I really didn't anticipate getting it, but I did.
Yay.
And even still, like after being accepted for that internship and like the months leading up to it, it still felt very surreal. Like it didn't feel like it was actually going to happen whatsoever. It just seemed very dreamlike. And then I remember finally like getting up there at the park that we were working at, and the day that I was supposed to go out onto the island in the Great Lakes. And it was so foggy, I couldn't see anything, but I could hear the birds and I could smell them even better.
Ooh.
It's very, very ammonia rich. Yeah, it'll make your eyes water when you get there. But I remember just like kind of standing there on like the edge of Lake Ontario and just feeling so excited and anxious to just get there. And finally, the boat arrives. I hop on the boat and we go out to the island. And it's chaos. There's birds flying everywhere. There's birds running on the ground. They're all yelling at each other. They're yelling at me. It smells so bad. You can hardly hear anyone because everyone's yelling. And I loved it. Yes. I loved every moment of it. I'm like, this is so awful, but it's so amazing. And at that point, I was just hooked. And so I wound up continuing with that internship for 3 years in total, spending 3 summers up in Canada.
Wow.
And at that point, I was like, I really want to continue with research. I want to keep going. I'm really passionate about birds now. Did like a complete 360 on this. And grad school is just kind of like the next choice for me to continue with my own education so that I can perform the research that's necessary to facilitate conservation.
Nice. As part of grad school, almost all of us have to teach at least some part of our time here. How do you like teaching?
That's been an interesting experience. I had the opportunity as an undergrad because I was at a smaller campus at Penn State. I started TAing then for an ecology course that I had taken a few semesters earlier, and I got a feel for it there. It was okay. I wasn't something that I was sold on just yet. I was like, I can do this if I need to make money. But then during my master's, it was a bit more hands-on with how we TA'd. And then here it's even more hands-on. Like I'm running my own labs and I have a stats course that I'm now in charge of.
It's a very good stats course.
Thank you. So that too has kind of evolved over time. I went from something that I really didn't care for, especially as being an introvert. Getting up and talking in front of people is a bit challenging. It's getting better. It's still challenging, but I'm enjoying it a lot more. It's a lot more rewarding than I had initially anticipated.
Aw, I like to hear that. Yeah. So you say you're an introvert. How does that, how do you think that might affect your experience as a scientist, especially because ecology is a field where we have to do a lot of collaborative work in order to get things done?
Right. So the collaboration can be a little bit difficult when you're first getting to know someone. As I get to know people, it becomes more comfortable, just like anything.
Sure.
But the big perk of it is I get to go to an island with 2 other people for 3 months, and that's about all the human contact I have.
Oh, okay. So you sort of balance it out.
Yeah. So the rest of the time I have to be social.
Another thing that you and I sort of have in common is our interest in science communication.
Yes.
So can you tell us more about your science communication project that you've been working on it's been over a year now, is that right?
No, not yet.
Oh,
so
okay.
It's been since January.
Ah, all right.
I think it's January.
Okay.
I think so. I should know this. But anyway, I am one of the co-blog owners. I guess you might call that.
Right.
I'm someone that oversees a blog that is called Field Secrets. That's all about what it's like to be a woman in the field, or someone who identifies as a woman. And so what we try to do is interview or capture stories from other folks in the field and talk about different challenges that we face that are relatively unique for women. Like when it comes to having to use the bathroom. No one ever talks about it during training with how you do it, how you make sure that you can keep yourself clean and healthy, and how you do it on especially really remote sites where you might not have a traditional toilet. So having these kind of stories and experiences where we can just be really open and discuss our own personal hygiene, our own personal needs, it's been really, really exciting. getting these bits of advice that everyone kind of collects over the years and amplifying it so that other people can be aware of that and realize, you know, it is possible to raise a family when doing field work. You know, I can be a family member and do that. Like, it's fine. And it's something that is totally feasible. Like, when I started doing field work, my first field season, I definitely was in that mentality where you think it's either having a family or being a scientist. And I was like, well, I want to be a scientist. I'm not going to have a family. And I've been really, really lucky and fortunate to have had 3 really strong female mentors who have really broken these stigmas and like really challenged a lot of these traditional norms that are kind of ingrained when you think of science. And I think I've been in a position where I got to see that and realize, oh yeah, okay, like it's okay to like have kids in the field and whatever, like it's fine. But then when I talk to other like field techs and talk to other people that I've worked with, and I, you know, share my experiences with other women, it's surprising how many of them are surprised.
Yeah.
You know, with, again, having a family while doing field work and stuff. So yeah, it's been really exciting to like help amplify that and to share those experiences more broadly.
Nice. And links to the Field Secrets blog and also to Christy's Twitter down in the video description, as always.
Thank you.
So that's been sort of your first foray into the science communication thing?
Yes.
Yeah?
It's been going pretty well. I think it's been since January. But it's really exciting to see how much that blog has taken off.
Nice.
It's very exciting.
Yeah. Do you have any sort of like Ricci goals for what you would like to be doing with it?
You know, I think it's kind of exactly this. You know, it's just sharing different bits of advice and otherwise pieces of information that are kind of secretive that shouldn't be secrets. We're looking to expand a bit more and to capture more diverse perspectives. But that's something that we're going to be working on in the future. So we're excited to start expanding a bit with that.
Nice. And along the lines of amplifying sort of secret or taboo knowledge or these sorts of things that everybody needs to know but nobody talks about, what would you say to a younger version of yourself? What would you want younger you or someone like you, you know, starting out with your background and experiences, to know about what they're getting themselves into or things that they should watch out for or just, you know, like how this is going to work out, that sort of thing? What would you want younger you to know?
I think that kind of traditional Murphy's Law, like everything that can go wrong definitely will go wrong. And then your backup plan for when the things go wrong, that will go wrong too. And it's okay. You know, that's part of science. And I think that's part of like what might be intimidating for other people is that we develop these expectations, these hypotheses, but they never work out exactly the way we think. You know, there's always something going on, and that's kind of like the messy nature of ecology, you know, doing our science outside. So much that can just affect what we would expect. And it's okay, because that's just the real world. I definitely was a bit uptight about that when my first foray into field work, all of my study chicks died because there was a night heron that was, which is another type of bird, was going around and eating the chicks at night.
Oh, that's good.
And like, it's definitely like disappointing in that like I was studying those chicks for my project, but this isn't like another species of bird that needs to survive. It's just doing what it knows. But it was still like just dealing with that. Like, there goes all my data.
Yep.
You know, that was challenging. But like in the long term, everything was fine. It worked out.
Yeah.
And it's just part of nature.
And you had a really good learning experience too,
Yes.
right?
Yep. I've learned what happens when everything disappears.
Nice, yeah. It is. It's fun that it's messy, even if it's frustrating at the same time.
Yeah.
And
it's also like managing those expectations that nothing is going to be perfect and dealing with frustrations in the field. Yeah.
we get to learn how to be very flexible and creative.
Yes. Definitely.
How do you deal with managing things going wrong like that when you're on your islands? Like you said, you have to bring everything with you. So like you have to sort of preempt or think about everything that could possibly go wrong and like have all of the stuff?
You plan for as much as what you can possibly come up with. In terms of human health, we want to bring out our first aid kit that's as complete as possible. That's pretty reasonable because we can look at our CPR and first aid training and figure out exactly what we'll need.
Sure.
When it comes to the science and nature side of it, it is much harder to anticipate what you're going to need. You can go in and have what you have planned for, but in the long term, like if something works out and you don't have the stuff for it, you document it as best as what you can with the tools that you have. And sometimes it means getting a little bit creative. One of the things that I've done is I wanted to create a grid so that I can look at plants that are around seabird burrows, the nests where they have their young. But you can't bring a real awkward grid with you on a boat and try to get it onto an island when there's lots of waves and you're in a tiny little dinghy floating on the shore. So we took sticks, as straight as what we could find, and, sanded them down a little bit and cut them down, make sure they're the right size. We taped them up and used some string, and that's my grid. And honestly, it's like the most proud I've ever been about like a craft ever. Is having something that is very, very straight, and I feel very good about like lining it up and having a real accurate capture of the vegetation or the plants that are around the burrow.
Nice. There's a lot of arts and crafts in ecology.
Yep. There was another time for my master's where I created little models of seabird chicks, and I put them in artificial burrows to see how the adult seabirds would respond.
Oh.
I spent so much time on it, and then a bunch of ravens stole all my models.
Oh no! Apparently they were convincing.
I guess. It's either that or like, oh, something new and fun to play with.
Yeah.
Because ravens are so smart.
Yeah.
So smart.
They certainly are. They like to mess with stuff. So I know this is maybe a little of a cheesy question, but we like to ask this of everyone because we're interested in you and we care about you. So when you finish your PhD program, where do you want to go next? What do you want to do with all of this?
That's a great question, and something that I'm still personally exploring because there are so many different options. Long term, what's going to matter for me the most is I want to wind up at a place where I know my work, my research is directly being applied towards conservation. So working for some sort of like nonprofit or even like a government agency that oversees wildlife, that's something I'm very keen on.
Nice.
But I'm not opposed to like winding up at a university so that I can kind of focus more on the research side. I'm really flexible is what it boils down to.
It's probably good to be that way.
Yeah, like especially like at this point in where I am with my degree, like you gotta be a bit flexible with career goals.
Yeah. I like what you said about directly applicable science, though. I've said this with people before, like there's certainly nothing wrong with pure science, and we definitely need to be doing it so that we have the answers to questions, but it feels very rewarding to be able to hand your research results to a conservation or land manager and say, here, I figured out a better way that you can do the thing, and yeah.
And so like one of the things about seabirds is that they are what's known as ecosystem engineers. They help to create and enhance areas on islands for other species so that other species also benefit. So one of the big conservation gains that comes out of my work is if we understand how seabirds are choosing different islands and we can better attract them to certain islands, they can help us restore these islands more effectively and naturally than if humans went out and spent a ton of money, a lot of time, a lot of energy and resources. We can just get the birds to kind of do it for us.
I love that.
So, yeah.
So, what sorts of other species rely on the engineering of the birds?
Okay, so seabird guano, or their poop, is super nutrient rich. And it's very beneficial to plants, helps plants grow, and it can help promote biodiversity through improved plant health.
Okay.
The other thing too is that it also runs off the islands through rain. And so there's another PhD student that works here, Lindsay.
Yep.
Have you interviewed her?
Not yet.
Not yet, okay.
She's on the list.
Well, just little teaser for her research. She has looked at the effects of guano running into the intertidal areas around an island and how that impacts those communities around the islands in the water. And so seabirds have this like really amazing output through their guano, even though it's a bit stinky and can burn your eyes a bit. It's good for the plants.
Interesting. And that's all a really important part of cycling of the nutrients, right? Because they caught all of their food way out at sea, and now they're bringing all of those nutrients that were in the ocean back to the island or to the immediate surrounding area.
Got it. That's exactly it. Yep.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So it's not actually so much the tunnels that they're burrowing as it is the guano that they're depositing that's important.
So the burrowing also helps as well. So it helps to physically move soil around, and they're also depositing guano in their burrows, which again, like introducing that directly into the soil. There are tons of roots that are around their burrows that help to give them that nice safe structure. It's one way to make sure that like the guano is directly going into the soil as opposed to run off into intertidal areas.
Awesome. Cool. So is there anything else that I haven't asked you about your research or about your experience as a scientist that you would like people to know?
Ooh.
I know it's a big open question, but I would hate to miss something.
No, I think that very broadly covered everything.
Yeah. Well, in that case, thank you so much for coming and talking to us about your research and stuff. It's really fascinating work, and it's exciting to learn more about what you do.
Yeah, I'm so excited that I get to share it with more of the world. You know, so few people actually get to see seabirds, but bringing it to people through communication and science is just as cool.
That's what we do. So if you liked this video, don't forget to like it. If you didn't like this video, please share it with someone who would. And if you'd like to support the Roving Naturalist, remember to hit the subscribe button and the bell notification icon. You can also follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Woo!